Do you get nervous when you're trying to communicate with executives or senior leaders in your organization? Do you feel totally unsure about how to make a great first impression? What's the most effective way to communicate with them? I'm a communications consultant. I have worked with CEOs, executives, and senior leaders for years. And in this video, I'm going to share my 4 top tips for communicating effectively with executives. These are all tried and tested tips that I have honed and practiced over the years. So let's jump right in to tip number 1. Tip number 1, when you are communicating with executives, be concise. All of the CEOs and leaders I have worked with over the years, their schedules are totally nuts. They have very limited time to spare. So bear this in mind when you are communicating with them. They will appreciate brevity and they will appreciate efficiency in the communication. So what does this mean? This means don't add in loads of waffle. Please get straight to the point. And if there's something you need them to do or take action on, make sure you're very clear about that. This is particularly true in organizations where people bill by the hour. So it might be the case that literally every minute counts for your senior leaders because every minute is costing them money. So how do you actually do this in practice? A really good tip is to think about what do they need to know rather than what do you want to tell them, because they might be totally different things. So you want to provide essential communication in a concise way. You want to have key points that you need to deliver. And you want to avoid giving any unnecessary details or loads of background or unnecessary context that is just diluting your message. So think about what they need to know. Give them that information. Be specific and be precise when you can. If you need to give dates or timelines, add those in. Think about the types of questions they might ask you and build them into your communication for that essential, relevant information that they need to know. So in a nutshell, this piece of advice is don't waste their time. They will really appreciate being concise and being brief in your communication. And part of this is if you are going into a presentation, a room full of executives, you should be fully briefed and prepared ahead of time. You should not have to ask them to explain any parts of the project or to give you background or context. You should already know that in advance. And also, please, you need to make sure that you are practicing your presentation before you get into that room. Do it at home, stand up and walk around as if you're really doing it, do your presentation out loud. It's also going to help you communicate more efficiently with this group if you think ahead of time what kind of questions they might ask you or what kind of objections they might have for the topic you are presenting on. And if you're really not sure what kind of things they might ask you, go into a tool like ChatGPT, give them a little bit of context about your audience, about your group of executives, and about your topic, and ask ChatGPT what kind of questions are they likely to ask me. So this can be really helpful when you are preparing on your own and you just need an outside perspective. AI can help you with that. Okay, so that's tip number 1, to be really concise, to be well prepared, and to give them the information that they need to know rather than all the information you might want to tell them. Tip number 2 for communicating effectively with executives is to think big picture. So if you think about the way that you might communicate with your team members or with your direct boss, you probably go into a lot of detail, right? You're going to talk about all the projects you're working on, all the dates, all the deliverables, all the activities, all of the tasks. So you're going to talk about loads of operational information, lots of stuff that you're doing, and all of the time frame you're going to do that in. And you've probably been trained over the years that this is how we communicate and work. We tell everybody everything all the time because it makes us look very impressive and very busy. But here's the thing, that is not the way to communicate with executives. They do not want to know all the details about your job or your work or your tasks or your projects. They want to think big picture. They want to focus on results rather than on tasks or projects. So for this audience, when you are communicating with executives, they don't really care how busy you've been. They don't really care how much stuff you're doing. They want to know, well, what does this mean for the company? What difference is this making to the business? So this is a very different way of communicating. If you work in a communications role, for example, maybe you're very keen to tell them about how many newsletter articles you wrote this month, or how many blog posts you wrote, or how many people attended a workshop that you ran. But that's really not relevant to this audience. So what they care about is, well, what is the result of all this activity? Yes, you were really busy, but what's the impact on that? What difference did it make? So this is what I mean when I think big picture. You need to get out of the weeds and all the details and bring it up to link it to the priorities and the strategy of the business. So say one of the priorities of the business is to reduce staff turnover. So what you want to think about is all of this activity that I've done, how is that having an impact on staff turnover? Is there any link I can draw there? Because that's what you want to communicate. Let's think through an example. Say you work in a company where one of the biggest priorities of the year is to save money, and you have been working on a piece of work that has reduced the time that people have to spend in meetings by 2 hours a week. And then you can calculate how much time you've saved the business and put a dollar figure on that. So you might be able to communicate to executives, well, it's not that I've done X, Y, and Z to reduce the time spent in meetings, but actually the impact of me doing that has saved the business $750,000 this year in lost productivity. So that's the angle you want to go at when you are communicating with senior leaders. If you can communicate in this way with your executives, you'll get yourself a really good reputation for delivering results, for focusing on things that matter, and it'll position you well for a promotion in the future. So that's tip number 2, to think big picture. Now, before I jump into tip number 3, if you are enjoying this content, I invite you to subscribe to my channel. So tip number 3 for communicating with executives is to understand their priorities. So in tip number 2, we talked about think big picture. So you can't communicate effectively about that big picture if you don't know what that is. So you absolutely have to understand the priorities of your executives in order to communicate with them effectively. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to align your message to their interests. So you have to know what their main concerns are and what they're focused on. So you want to frame your communication in a way that shows what you're working on aligns well with their priorities and the things that they want to achieve. And this is the essence of good communication, isn't it? Know your audience. You must understand what do they care about. Sometimes you'll hear people say the question of like, what keeps your CEO up at night? This is the way of saying like, what do they really care about? How can I communicate about my work in a way that aligns with what they really care about? Because if you get a good handle on this, then you can always tailor your message to that. So when you're communicating with executives, make sure that you are playing to their selfish desires. Talk about how the work that you're doing is helping to solve their problems. They will love you for this. So make it about them. It's about them and not about you. So if you don't know the priorities of your senior executives, it's really important that you take the time to find that out. Most businesses will have a business strategy. Maybe it's a 3 or 5 year plan. You need to go and find this and read this. What you really want to get familiar with is the vision of the organization, the mission of the organization, and its key priorities. So these key priorities, they might be called different things. They might be called strategic objectives. They might be called strategic priorities. They might be called strategic pillars. There's probably going to be 3, 4, or 5 of these at quite a high level, and this is what your executives care about. So these might be big picture things like we want the company to make more money. We want to have more market share. We want to have higher rates of customer loyalty. These are those big picture things that everyone in the company is striving towards. Something else you should also find out is the time frame of your organization strategy so that you could talk about this when you are communicating with your executives. In some companies, it might just be a 1 year plan. In other ones, there might be a 3 or 5 year plan. It's really useful to know this so that you can align your own strategy and your own work to these timeframes. That will position you as a strategic thinker and someone that is really aligned with the overall business strategy. And you will be seen as someone that gets it and that has commercial and real deep value to the organization. Now, before I jump into the very last tip, I would love to hear from you. Are any of these tips resonating with you? Do you recognize the value in any of these? Which of them is the most useful for you? Please leave me a comment. I would love to hear it. And don't forget, subscribe to my channel so I can keep giving you free communications advice. Okay, tip 4 for communicating effectively with executives is to provide solutions and not problems. So maybe you're coming in to do a presentation to a group of executives and you have spotted a glaring problem in the business. Maybe there's a risk or something that's not working properly. You don't want to come into that presentation and just present the problem and make it their problem. You want to come into that presentation and communicate that you understand the problem, that you've done your research, and that you have a potential solution. Because senior leaders will really appreciate people that can not only spot the problems in the business, but that can propose actionable solutions to solve those problems. So be prepared to discuss the problem, present your solution, take all their questions and discuss it in depth. This is a really great approach to think about when you're communicating with executives. It positions you as a problem solver, as somebody that has lots of initiative and someone that is really genuinely valuable to invest their time in and to spend time with. And this kind of approach can actually increase your value to the organization over time. It will position you very well for any promotions that are coming up, and it gives you more credibility. It positions you as somebody that can be relied upon to tackle all these challenges effectively. Now, why this is really crucial for communicating with senior leaders is because essentially you're taking on the problem yourself rather than making it their problem. So you're kind of taking work off their desk. They will really, really appreciate this because remember, they're super, super busy. So if you can come into that group and communicate solutions that are well thought out, that are based on data and research, and you've kind of weighed up the pros and cons, you will just blow them away and they will be really delighted because essentially you're reducing their workload. If you are solving the problem, it means that they don't have to. So when you are communicating something like this, make sure that you come armed with a really good rationale. Make sure you have lots of data and evidence for why you've picked this solution rather than another one. There might be an appendix you can email out to them afterwards. If they want to get into the nitty-gritty, you can provide it to them as a read. So there you have it. They're my 4 top pieces of advice for communicating effectively with the executives or the senior leaders in your organization. These tips have served me really well over the years. They still do, and I hope that they're useful to you too. Now, something I didn't talk about in this video is all the information that I wish I had known before I started working in the communications industry, before I ever got my first communications job. If you want to know all the things I wish I'd known at the start of my career, then you can watch this video next.